Security, remove this woman immediately. Victoria Bradford's voice slices across the Hamptons estate. Her Cartier watch glints as she waves dismissively. I will not have our family's reputation destroyed by some crasher looking for handouts. Angela Washington doesn't move. Ma'am, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Victoria steps closer, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. Listen carefully. This estate is worth $30 million. These guests represent old American families. You do not belong here. I apologize for any inconvenience. Victoria's eyes narrow. The audacity, walking onto private property like you own the place. She snaps her fingers at approaching security. Escort her out now before she tries to steal something or embarrass herself further. Angela's hands remain steady at her sides. Her voice carries quiet grace. Of course, as you wish. Victoria has no idea she just threatened the wrong woman. Angela doesn't leave. Instead, Angela simply turns and walks toward the garden, moving with a calm certainty that unsettles the staff more than Victoria's shouting ever had. It's subtle at first, just a few lingering looks, a few paused hands in mid-task. But the longer Angela moves through the estate, the more the atmosphere shifts. The servers glance at her, not with suspicion, but with something closer to recognition or fear. Victoria senses it, and it infuriates her. She storms after Angela, heels cracking angrily across the stone. Excuse me, I said you're leaving. Angela doesn't hurry, doesn't argue. Her footsteps carry her along a narrow flagstone path, one most guests never notice. She steps over a cracked stone without looking down, avoids a sprinkler head hidden under a rose bush, and takes a gentle curve that leads directly toward the oldest part of the estate. Victoria freezes. There's no possible way a stranger would know that route. From the veranda, the head groundskeeper stops cold. His weathered face drains of color as Angela's silhouette glides past him. Without meaning to, he removes his cap the way one might greet someone deeply respected. Victoria catches the gesture. What are you doing? She snaps. The groundskeeper startles, fumbling his cap. Nothing, ma'am. But his eyes betray him. He knows this woman, and he's terrified she's here. Angela continues toward the massive oak near the reflecting pool. Her fingers graze its trunk, brushing over faint initials carved decades ago. Initials only a child raised here would know about. Victoria's unease twists into suspicion. Who is this woman? Why does she know the land better than the people living on it? Angela lifts her eyes briefly toward the mansion windows. Dozens of staff whisper behind the glass, watching her every step like she's a ghost returning home. Something dark and old is waking underneath this estate, and Victoria can feel it. Because the moment Angela touched that oak tree, everyone who had ever worked on that estate knew the truth. She wasn't trespassing. She was coming back for something that once belonged to her. And Victoria was the only one who didn't see it yet. Angela paused at the edge of the reflecting pool, the same spot generations of Washingtons once used as a quiet retreat. The fountain's soft spray shimmered in the sunlight, but her gaze wasn't on the water. She was looking at the brass plate on the stone base, smooth, polished, and suspiciously empty. Not truly empty, though, just scraped clean. The metal was slightly discolored in one spot, as if someone had removed something years ago. Something important. Angela touched the faint grooves with her fingertips, remembering exactly what used to be there. A nameplate, a dedication, her family's legacy. Behind her, the catering manager nearly drops a tray when he sees her standing there. His expression flickers. Shock, guilt, recognition. He whispers something to a server beside him. That server stiffens, then hurries away with wide eyes. Victoria notices the whispers, notices the stares, notices the sudden tension rippling through the workers like wind through tall grass. "Why is everyone acting like lunatics?" Victoria mutters, her irritation boiling. She marches toward Angela, determined to reassert control over her event and her estate. But the closer she gets, the less sure of herself she becomes. Angela steps away from the pool and continues walking, straight toward the carriage house. Not the new one built by the Bradfords, but the original stone structure tucked to the side of the property. Most guests never even realized it existed. Angela doesn't hesitate for a second. She takes the shortcut through the ivy walkway, her pace unbroken. That shortcut wasn't on any blueprint the Bradfords had ever seen. Victoria's throat tightens. Something is wrong, terribly wrong. She storms after Angela again, anger fueling her steps. "Stop right there, I'm speaking to you!" Angela does stop this time. She turns gracefully, the sunlight catching the calm steadiness in her eyes. "Mrs. Bradford," she says softly. "You're upset." "Upset?" Victoria's voice cracks. "You're trespassing on my property, embarrassing my guests and distracting my staff." Angela tilts her head slightly. "Your staff seems distracted for reasons unrelated to me." Victoria follows Angela's gaze toward the workers. The moment her eyes land on them, they whip their heads away, pretending to be busy. But their fear is unmistakable. Not fear of Angela, but fear of what her presence means. A cold sensation crawls down Victoria's spine. "What exactly is going on here?" she whispers. Angela simply resumes walking, fingertips gliding along the carriage house's weathered stone, brushing over a spot where her great-grandfather carved something long ago. Victoria watches her, unease now outweighing her anger. Angela knows this estate like someone who lived here, like someone who belonged here, like someone who never should have been forced to leave. And as the groundskeeper watches Angela trace that hidden carving, he can't stay silent anymore, because the woman Victoria tried to throw out is the one person whose return everyone on the staff has feared, prayed for, and whispered about for 20 years. The old groundskeeper, Thomas, beloved by every worker on the estate, steps forward with trembling hands. He's pale, shaking, gripping his cap so tightly the brim bends under his fingers. He doesn't dare look at Victoria. His eyes are locked on Angela. He approaches her slowly, like a child approaching a long-lost family member. "Miss Angela?" His voice cracks on the second syllable. Is that really you?" Angela turns toward him with a gentle warmth that softens every line of her face. "Hello, Thomas." Thomas's jaw clenches as emotion washes over him. Decades of loyalty, memories, and buried truth flood his expression. Victoria wheels around. "Thomas, what do you think you're doing speaking to this woman? Do you know her?" Thomas opens his mouth, then hesitates. There's no script for this moment, no safe answer. His eyes flick toward the mansion, toward the windows where staff peer out like ghosts trapped in a lie. He finally whispers, barely audible, "Yes, ma'am." "I know her." Victoria's face contorts. "From where? Explain yourself." But Thomas isn't looking at Victoria anymore. His eyes shine with tears as he addresses Angela again. "You look just like your father," he murmurs, voice breaking. "Same eyes, same way of standing. He'd be so proud seeing you back here." The word back hits the guests like a slap. Even Victoria freezes. "Back?" she repeats sharply. "What do you mean, back?" Thomas flinches, but the truth has clawed its way out, too big to be shoved back in. "She used to visit," he whispers. "Long time ago. Before—" He swallows hard. "Before everything changed." Victoria storms to him, grabbing his arm like he's a misbehaving servant. "Stop mumbling! Speak clearly!" But Thomas gently pulls away, something he has never dared do in 20 years. Angela touches his arm softly. "It's all right, Thomas." He nods, eyes filled with relief. Someone finally gave him permission to speak the truth that had lived heavy on his conscience. As staff begin drifting closer, whispering, exchanging heavy looks, a strange understanding passes among them. The head butler lowers his eyes. Two housekeepers share a trembling breath. The wedding photographer slowly lowers his camera. Everyone knows. Everyone except Victoria. And the realization terrifies her. "What is happening?" she demands again, voice rising. "Someone tell me!" No one answers. No, not because they don't know, but because they all know exactly who Angela is. And before Victoria can force anyone to speak, Angela walks toward the mansion with the confidence of someone who once held the keys, sending a silent shockwave through every staff member who remembers the day her family vanished from the estate, and why no one dared talk about it until now. Angela ascended the stone steps leading to the mansion's rear entrance, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked those steps hundreds of times before. Her fingertips brushed the brass doorknob, once polished daily, now dulled by years of careless hands. Victoria had always believed it was a decorative antique piece, but Angela knew better. It wasn't decorative, it was a relic. And beneath years of scratches and tarnish, she could still feel the faint outline of a monogram, the Washington family crest, carved into the metal long before the Bradford name ever touched this land. Inside the mansion, the staff crowded the windows in silence. Some clutched each other's arms, a few looked as though they might cry, not from fear, no, from guilt, from memories, from the weight of secrets they had carried for far too long. Victoria noticed their reactions, but she drew the wrong conclusion entirely. "Why is everyone staring at her like she's royalty?" she barked, spinning on her heel. "This is pathetic! All of you, back to work!" No one moved. Not a single person. They didn't dare look away from Angela. Even the head butler, a man who had survived 3 generations of wealthy families, was frozen stiff, his hands trembling around a silver serving tray. Victoria's voice rose. "Excuse me? Did you all lose your minds today?" But Angela didn't give her a second glance. She was already moving again, sliding her hand along the banister of the back stairs, her pace slow and deliberate. She avoided a certain floorboard at the top, a floorboard that creaked under the lightest step. She didn't even look down. The butler gasped softly. Victoria's irritation shifted into something deeper, confusion laced with dread. "How did she know that?" she demanded, looking around wildly. "No one knows that. No guest has ever—" Before she could finish, 2 housekeepers exchanged looks, the kind people share when a long-buried truth finally claws itself to the surface. One of them whispered a single word under her breath. "Her." Victoria snapped around. "What did you say?" The housekeeper stared at the floor, cheeks flushing. "Nothing, ma'am." But it was too late. The air had changed. Even the wedding guests sensed it, the unspoken knowledge hanging heavy and electric. Angela stopped in the center of the terrace and slowly scanned the estate. Her eyes lingered on the old oak tree, the carriage house, the reflecting pool. Every place held a memory, every memory held a loss. Victoria felt her pulse spike. Then Angela did something unexpected. She inhaled slowly, and for the first time since arriving, she allowed a hint of sorrow, real, raw sorrow, to cross her face. Thomas, watching from a distance, removed his cap again. "I knew she'd return someday," he whispered to the head butler. Victoria's head snapped toward them. "Return? Return from where? Someone explain this right now!" But no one answered her, because they all knew. And just when Victoria was about to grab Angela herself, the estate's oldest employee stepped forward with shaking hands, ready to reveal the one secret the Bradford family had managed to bury for 20 long years, and the truth that would shatter Victoria's world. The head butler, Mr. Alden, was a quiet man, stoic, disciplined, loyal to a fault. Victoria often bragged that he was practically British royalty, trained in discretion and service, but not even he could hold the truth inside anymore. He stepped forward with a trembling inhale. His voice, usually smooth as polished mahogany, quivered. "Mrs. Bradford, there is something you should know." Victoria spun toward him, desperate for control. "Finally! Someone sensible! Tell these people to stop gawking at that woman and get back to—" But Alden didn't bow. He didn't nod. He didn't defer to her the way he always had. Instead, he turned toward Angela and bowed to her. Not a polite nod, not a courtesy gesture. A deep, reverent bow, the kind given to someone whose authority outshines titles and wealth. Gasps rippled through the wedding guests. Victoria's mouth hung open. "Alden, what on earth are you doing?" Alden straightened slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on Angela with respect bordering on awe. "Ma'am," he said softly to her, "it is good to see you again." Victoria staggered back, like the wind had been knocked from her chest. "Again? Again? Alden, you worked for my family for 20 years. What do you mean again?" Alden swallowed hard. "I worked for the Washington family long before the Bradfords ever lived here." The lawn fell silent, Victoria's face drained of color. That's impossible! We bought this estate from— Alden shook his head. No, ma'am, the Washington family never sold it. Several servers gasped, hands flying to their mouths. Victoria sputtered. That's ridiculous, you must be confused. Alden's gaze hardened. I am not confused, Mrs. Bradford. He looked around, addressing everyone, guests and staff alike. I was a young man when Mr. Robert Washington passed. I watched that family build this estate, saw generations grow here. I watched Angela take her first steps on this lawn. Angela lowered her eyes. A hush fell. A reverent hush. 20 years ago, Alden continued, voice breaking, something happened. Something none of us were allowed to speak of. The Washington name vanished from the property overnight, but not legally, not truthfully, only publicly. Victoria shook her head violently. No, this is nonsense! All lies! But Alden didn't flinch. Ma'am, every employee who's been here long enough knows the truth. The Washington family owned this place for nearly a century, and Miss Angela— He paused, emotion tightening his throat. She was the last rightful heir before everything was taken from her. Victoria stared, speechless, her world tipping sideways. The wedding guests began murmuring in disbelief, turning to stare at Angela with a mixture of awe and fear. Angela, however, remained calm, watchful, almost saddened. She had expected this moment. She had prepared for it. And she knew it was only the beginning, because just as Victoria tried to regain control, another voice cut through the tension. A voice with a badge, authority, and undeniable fear when he spoke Angela's name. The voice that cut through the commotion didn't belong to a guest, or a staff member, or even Victoria's family. It belonged to a man in uniform. Detective Ray Coleman stepped onto the terrace with a purposeful stride, his badge glinting at his belt, and a wedding invitation tucked neatly into his jacket pocket. He hadn't planned to arrive early, but the moment he saw the cluster of guests circling someone at the edge of the lawn, instinct pulled him forward. Then he saw her. He froze mid-step. The color drained from his face. The man who had once chased armed suspects without blinking suddenly looked like a rookie facing his first day on the force. He whispered it, barely audible. Angela! Victoria spun toward him with relief. Detective Coleman! Thank goodness! Arrest this woman immediately. She's trespassing, disturbing my guests, and pretending she— Ray didn't hear a word. His eyes were locked on Angela with a mixture of recognition, shock, and unmistakable respect, almost fear. Victoria frowned. Detective, are you listening? Ray swallowed hard, then gave Angela a slow nod. Ma'am, he said quietly, I didn't expect to see you here. Angela offered him a small, polite smile. Hello, Detective Coleman. Congratulations on your promotion. I hear it was well earned. Ray almost choked. Thank you, Ma'am. That means a great deal. The wedding guests stared. Ray Coleman, the no-nonsense detective, the man famous for keeping his composure during high-stakes cases, was speaking to this woman like she was someone untouchable. Victoria's irritation snapped back into anger. Ray, what is going on? Why are you acting like she's important? Ray hesitated, torn between duty and discretion. He glanced at Angela for guidance. She gave him the smallest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Mrs. Bradford, Ray finally said, this isn't a situation you want to escalate. Victoria's mouth dropped open. Escalate? Escalate? I asked you to arrest her and you're lecturing me? Ray's tone sharpened just a fraction. With all due respect, ma'am, I can't arrest someone unless a crime has been committed. A crime has been No, Ray interrupted gently yet firmly, not by her. Victoria's jaw clenched. Do you know who this woman even is? Ray inhaled deeply, bracing himself. Yes, I do. Harrison Blackwell, Victoria's brother-in-law, stepped forward, puffing out his chest. Then tell us, who is she? Some kind of criminal you arrested before? Ray barked a short laugh, humorless and sharp. Criminal! No, she's— He stopped himself just in time. Angela's eyes held his with silent command. Detective, she said softly. Please, not yet. Ray nodded, without hesitation. The crowd gasped. They had just witnessed a police detective obey an order from a woman Victoria had tried to throw out. Victoria recoiled. "Ray, you're being ridiculous! She's a nobody, a troublemaker, a trespasser!" Ray met her eyes with an expression Victoria had never seen from him before. "Mrs. Bradford," he said slowly, "if you knew who you were dealing with, you would not have spoken to her that way." Silence fell again. Heavy, sharp, unsettling. Somewhere in the back row of guests, a wine glass shattered against a stone edge. Angela remained still, calm, poised, as if she'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. And before Victoria could demand answers, Ray reached for his phone, ready to reveal the one fact that would topple her world, destroy her assumptions, and expose the truth she never imagined. Ray Coleman tapped his phone with steady fingers, his gaze never leaving Angela's face. He wasn't searching randomly. He knew exactly where to look. The crowd leaned in, the air thick with tension, curiosity, and the first hints of dread. Victoria, trembling with rage, folded her arms. "This is absurd! What are you doing, checking her criminal record? Good! Finally!" Ray lifted his eyes slowly. "No, Mrs. Bradford, not her record." He turned the screen so only Angela could see. She nodded once, allowing him to continue. Then Ray turned to the crowd. "I'm checking property ownership records." A ripple of confusion swept through the guests. "Why?" Victoria demanded. "We own this property!" Ray scrolled, his eyebrows arching as the county database loaded. "Do you? Let's verify." Victoria stiffened. "We've lived here 20 years. This is our home." Ray looked at her with unsettling calm. "That doesn't mean you own it." Murmurs erupted like wildfire. Ray spoke louder. "For transparency, county property records are public. Anyone can access them, which means—" He tapped one final button. "Which means we can see exactly who this land belongs to." Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but Ray read the screen before she could utter a word. His face changed. The shift was subtle, shock, respect, and a touch of awe blending into one. Ray exhaled slowly. "Well, that explains everything." Victoria's throat tightened. "What? What does it say?" Ray cleared his voice. "This estate was purchased in 1924 by James Washington." Gasps. Victoria scoffed. "Ancient history. We bought it decades ago." Ray shook his head. "No sale recorded." Another louder gasp. He continued reading, voice steady as a judge's gavel. "The property then transferred to his son, Robert Washington, in 1952, and the inheritance records show it was passed again in 2003 to—" He paused, deliberately, lifting his gaze to Angela. She watched him with quiet composure. Ray finished. "To Angela Washington." The estate went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Victoria took a step back. "No, that can't be right. That's impossible." Ray didn't react to her panic. "County records don't lie!" A server dropped a stack of champagne flutes. Glass shattered across the patio. Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This must be a clerical error." Ray shook his head again. "No error. Miss Washington has been the legal owner for 20 years. Victoria's face drained of color, her voice suddenly thin. "But we've been living here. We've been paying—" "Have you?" Ray asked. It wasn't accusatory. It was observational and devastating. Whispers spread among the guests, the staff, the caterers, the musicians. Every person in the vicinity turned toward Angela with a new understanding. Not a trespasser, not a crasher, not an intruder. The owner. Victoria's world cracked. "Impossible," she whispered. "Impossible." Ray slid his phone back into his pocket. "Mrs. Bradford, you've been living on federal land owned by someone else." Victoria staggered, gripping the edge of a table. Angela stood silently, not crowing, not smirking, simply watching. Patient, prepared, and still not revealing everything. Because the moment Ray confirmed the property belonged to Angela, another voice, unexpected, terrified, and far too familiar, rose from the crowd, unraveling a deeper secret that would turn the wedding upside down. Before Victoria could utter another denial, Another voice broke through the chaos. A hesitant, trembling voice that carried a weight no one expected. It came from behind the crowd. "Mom, we need to talk." The wedding guests shifted, parting like water around a ship's bow. Michael Bradford, the groom, still in his tuxedo, his boutonniere slightly wilted from the ceremony, stepped forward. His new bride clutched his arm, eyes wide, clearly having no idea what was unfolding. Victoria spun around, desperate for an ally. "Michael, tell this detective he's wrong. Tell everyone this woman is lying. This is our estate." But Michael looked devastated. Not angry, not defensive. Devastated. He couldn't meet her eyes at first. His hands shook as he wiped sweat from his brow. "Mom," his voice cracked. I know who she is." A hush swept the lawn once again. Ray stiffened. Angela remained perfectly still. Victoria blinked. What? What are you talking about?" Michael swallowed hard. 3 years ago, I stood in front of a federal courtroom. The bride's grip tightened. "Michael, don't," but he continued, voice hollow. "I was facing a mandatory minimum of 25 years. Money laundering, fraud. The evidence was stacked against me." The guests gasped. Several covered their mouths. Others exchanged horrified glances, this pristine, old-money family hiding such a scandal. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. "You never told me this." "I couldn't." Michael's voice trembled. "It would have destroyed the family name, the business, everything Dad spent his life building." Victoria clutched her pearls like a lifeline. But the case disappeared. They dropped the charges. "No." Michael shook his head slowly. "They didn't drop anything." His eyes finally met Angela's. "She did." A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Angela's expression softened, not with pride, but with something like sadness. Michael gestured toward her with trembling fingers. "Judge Angela Washington presided over my case. She had the power to bury me, to end my life. But she didn't. She gave me community service, counseling, restitution, a chance to make things right." He swallowed hard. "She saved me," the bride whispered. "Michael." But he didn't stop. "Mom, the only reason I'm standing here today, the only reason I'm not in federal prison, is because of her mercy." Victoria reeled back, the ground seeming to tilt beneath her feet. No, this can't be real. You're mistaken." Michael shook his head. "I'd recognize her anywhere. I bowed to her when I walked into that courtroom, and if I'm being honest," his voice cracked, "I should bow to her now." Victoria's face contorted with panic. "Don't you dare embarrass this family any further!" Michael ignored her. He turned toward Angela and right there in front of the entire wedding party, lowered his head, not fully bowing but enough to show the truth. He stood before someone with not just authority, but with a power that had once shaped the course of his life. And for the first time, the wedding guests understood why Detective Coleman treated Angela with such reverence. Not just the owner, not just someone wronged, someone powerful. And before anyone could process Michael's confession, the estate lawyer arrived, only to freeze mid-step when he saw Angela, realizing instantly that his entire career, reputation, and perhaps even freedom were now on the line. Richard Peaton, high-powered attorney, notorious for protecting wealthy families from the consequences of their own making, strode onto the terrace with confidence radiating from every inch of him. He adjusted his tie, straightened his expensive suit jacket, and scanned the area. "Victoria, where are you? My apologies for the delay. Traffic was a nightmare. You said there was a trespasser? Someone claiming ownership?" His voice carried the smugness of a man used to bulldozing problems with legal jargon and intimidation. But then he saw Angela, and his entire demeanor changed. The blood drained from his face. His briefcase slipped from his fingers and thudded onto the stone patio. He stumbled a half-step backward. "Judge Washington," he whispered, almost choking on the words. The crowd froze. Even Victoria blinked in confusion. "Judge? What? Richard, you know this woman." Richard's throat bobbed in a hard swallow. "Everyone in the Eastern District knows her." His voice cracked. "Your Honor, I didn't expect—" Angela gave him a single polite nod. Richard nearly fainted. Victoria stared between them, her panic rising. "What are you saying, that woman? Her is a judge? A real judge? You must be joking." Richard shook his head. "Not just any judge, Victoria." He pointed toward Angela with a trembling hand. "She is Judge Angela Washington, federal judge, appointed for life by presidential nomination and Senate confirmation." Gasps and whispers rippled across the lawn like shockwaves. Victoria's face twisted. That doesn't make sense. She came here dressed like—" "Careful," Richard whispered sharply. "Very careful. The warning wasn't for Angela's sake. It was for Victoria's." Richard turned fully toward Angela, posture stiffening into a respectful near bow. "Your Honor, if I had known you were involved, I would have never—" Angela cut him off gently. "Mr. Peaton, this isn't about you." But the lawyer didn't relax. His forehead glistened with sweat. He looked as though he were standing before the highest court in the country, because in a way, he was. Victoria's voice shrilled. "Richard, do something! Tell her to leave! Tell her she's committing fraud!" Richard snapped his head toward her. "Victoria, do not speak to a federal judge like that!" The guests whispered furiously, realizing how dangerous Victoria's earlier insults had been. Richard's voice cracked as he continued. "Your Honor, if I may, does this involve the Washington estate case from 20 years ago?" Angela didn't speak. Her silence was answer enough. Richard staggered, hand trembling against his forehead. "Good God! Victoria, you have no idea the magnitude of what you've stepped into." Victoria stared, horrified. "Magnitude of what?" Richard inhaled sharply. "Judge Washington presides over major federal crimes, fraud, corruption, property disputes. She has put mayors, CEOs, and senators behind bars." He nearly whispered, "She is the last person on earth you want to provoke." Victoria shook her head in denial, her voice cracking. No, this isn't happening." But it was. And Angela had only revealed a fraction of the truth, because as the air tightened around the guests, Angela finally opened the black folder she'd carried from her car, revealing a seal so powerful, so final, that even the bravest among them felt their knees weaken. Angela placed the black folder on the nearest table, the mat cover absorbing the sunlight rather than reflecting it. No one dared breathe as she flipped it open, slow and deliberate. The gold federal seal inside gleamed like a verdict. Detective Ray Coleman immediately stepped back 3 paces. Richard Peaton swallowed so hard it was audible. Several guests instinctively straightened their posture as though preparing for judgment. Victoria, trembling but still stubborn, forced out a laugh. "Really? A fancy folder? That's what all this fuss is about? Richard, tell her this means nothing. Tell her." But Richard shook his head. "Victoria, that seal isn't decorative. That folder comes directly from the administrative office of the U.S. courts." Ray added, voice tense. "Only federal judges carry that design, and only during official business." Heads turned toward Angela. Official business. She had come here, not by accident, not as a guest, but with intent. Angela took out a thick sheaf of documents, stamped, notarized, authenticated. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't raise her voice. She simply placed the first page in front of her. "This," she said calmly, "is the original deed to the Washington estate, signed by my grandfather in 1924. She laid down another. "This is the inheritance document from my father's estate." Another. "These are the last 20 years of property tax records, paid in full by the Angela Washington Trust." The guests leaned in, shock deepening. Angela continued, her voice steady as polished stone. "And this is the federal inquiry opened after irregularities were found surrounding the supposed transfer of ownership to the Bradford family." Victoria staggered back. "Inquiry? What inquiry?" Angela tapped the folder. "The one initiated when the IRS notified federal authorities that only one family has paid taxes on this land since 2003. All eyes swung to Victoria. Richard muttered under his breath, "Oh no! Oh no. Victoria put up a shaking hand. This This is a scam, a setup. My late husband handled the purchase. I know we own this place." "Do you have the deed?" Angela asked gently. Victoria blinked. "What?" "The deed," Angela repeated. "Proof of purchase. Do you have it?" I'm sure it's in the safe somewhere." Ray crossed his arms. "We checked the safe last year during the estate valuation, Mrs. Bradford. There was no deed." Victoria's lips parted. Richard rubbed his temples. "Victoria, tell me you filed something, paperwork, anything." I don't know. My husband handled everything. I trusted him." Angela nodded once, sympathetically, almost mercifully. "I believe you trusted him," she said. "But trust does not override federal records." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes, but beneath them simmered anger, humiliation, and fear. You set us up!" she snapped at Angela. "You manipulated this! You planned this!" Angela closed the folder. "No," she said, voice soft but resolute. "You invited the world onto land that was never yours." A wave of murmurs rippled across the guests. Staff members watched with expressions that ranged from sorrow to vindication. Victoria shook her head violently. "No, I refuse to accept this. This is my estate, my family's home. You can't just show up after 20 years and take it back." Angela stepped closer, calm, steady. "I didn't come to take anything," she said. "I came for the truth. And, Mrs. Bradford, the truth is about to become far more complicated." Because, just as Victoria was preparing to launch another desperate denial, Angela opened the final document. The one that revealed exactly how the Bradford family had taken the estate, and why the law was finally ready to catch up with them. The final document Angela unfolded was older, the paper slightly yellowed, the ink faint but readable. The moment the corner appeared, Thomas the groundskeeper inhaled sharply. He knew that paper. He had seen it once, 20 years ago, the day everything changed. Angela held it up where everyone could see. "This," she said, "is the letter my father received claiming the property had been sold to pay off fictitious debts." Victoria blinked. "Fictitious? No, there were debts. There must have been debts." "There were none." Angela laid the letter flat. "My father spent months trying to verify it, but every office he contacted showed no record of debt, no foreclosure, no liens." Ray stepped closer, reading the letter's letterhead. "Bradford Estate Management, signed by Richard, your late husband." Victoria's world lurched. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." Richard Peaton leaned forward, examining the handwriting. This isn't legitimate. The formatting is wrong. The legal terminology is incorrect." "This letter was not prepared by any certified office." Angela nodded. "It wasn't. It was a forgery, a convincing one, but still a forgery." The guests erupted in whispers. Victoria swayed on her feet. "My husband wouldn't. He would never." Angela's voice softened. "Mrs. Bradford, I believe your husband was manipulated as much as my father was. But someone in your circle, engineered a scheme to remove my family from this land." Ray spoke up. "A 20-year fraud. That's federal time." Richard Peaton groaned, wiping sweat from his brow. This could involve tax fraud, property fraud, conspiracy, mail fraud." 20 years' worth," Angela added. Victoria shook her head violently. "You're lying. You're all lying. This is a nightmare. We paid taxes. We maintained this property. Angela interrupted gently. "You paid nothing. You maintained nothing. You lived here, rent-free on someone else's land." Victoria's voice cracked. "But everything looked legitimate." Angela nodded sympathetically. "Fraud often does." The bride whispered urgently to her husband. "Michael, this could ruin us." Michael looked sick. Ray stepped forward. "Your Honor, if you wish, I can place Mrs. Bradford under debt." "No." Angela raised a hand. Ray froze. The crowd stared in silence. Angela continued, "No arrests today." Victoria let out a sob of relief. Short-lived. "But," Angela said, turning toward her, "there will be accountability." Victoria's breath hitched. Angela placed a hand on the final page in the folder, a page none of them had seen yet. "This document," she said quietly, "contains the results of a federal audit opened 8 months ago." Richard's eyes widened. "You've been investigating this estate?" "Quietly," Angela replied. "I wanted to understand how far the deception went." Michael stepped forward, pale as paper. "How far did it go?" Angela looked directly at him. "Far enough that your father didn't orchestrate it, someone else did." Gasps, confused stares, questions rising like smoke. Victoria choked out, "Then who?" Angela closed the folder with a soft thud. "That," she said, "is the part you're all going to want to sit down for." Because the next name Angela revealed wasn't a Bradford nor a Washington, but someone whose involvement would shake the foundation of the entire wedding and expose a betrayal no one saw coming. A tense, breathless silence swept over the estate as Angela set the black folder aside. Every eye clung to her, waiting, dreading the next revelation. Victoria, clinging to the back of a chair for balance, whispered, Who would do this? If not my husband, then who?" Angela inhaled slowly, her composure calm yet unyielding. "The federal audit traced the trail of forged letters, altered property files, and unauthorized maintenance transfers to one central figure." She paused. "A figure who wasn't a Bradford and wasn't a Washington." Detective Coleman, reading the room with a veteran's instincts, braced himself. "Your Honor, do you want me to announce it?" Angela shook her head. "No. This one I should say myself." She looked out over the crowd, hundreds of faces pale with fear, curiosity, or guilt. The wedding orchestra members stood frozen with their instruments mid-air. Even the catering staff, who had spent 20 years avoiding this truth, leaned forward as if the answer were a stone lodged in their throats. Angela finally spoke. "The person who orchestrated the entire scheme was your attorney." Gasps burst across the patio like an explosion. Victoria blinked rapidly. My attorney? Richard? That's absurd. He's been with our family since before we moved here." But Richard Peaton didn't look surprised. In fact, he sank into a chair, face collapsing, hands trembling. Ray Coleman straightened. "Mr. Peaton, is this true?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He stared down at his polished shoes, the weight of decades crashing onto his shoulders. Angela continued gently. "The audit uncovered something peculiar. My father received forged letters claiming he owed debts. The IRS was informed of property tax payments, but they came from my trust. Yet someone filed paperwork claiming they came from your family." Victoria whipped toward him, betrayal twisting her face. "Richard, what did you do?" Richard finally lifted his head. His voice came out broken, defeated. I thought your husband knew. I thought you knew. I thought it was agreed upon." "Agreed upon?" Victoria shrieked. "To steal an estate?" Richard wiped sweat from his brow. "It wasn't meant to be theft. It was supposed to be temporary. A legal maneuver gone wrong. Your husband insisted the Washingtons were leaving the state. He wanted the property. Said he'd negotiate with them later." Angela's eyes softened with painful clarity. "He never did." Richard swallowed again. "No, he didn't. And when he passed, everything spiraled. I kept quiet. I didn't know how to fix it." Victoria staggered. "You ruined us, and you let me take the fall today." Richard looked utterly shattered. "I never intended harm. I just never corrected the lie." The bride covered her mouth. Michael closed his eyes, devastated. Angela's voice remained steady. "Mr. Peaton, the audit concluded you forged the letters, misled both families, and altered records to cover the deception." Richard broke. Tears slid down his face. Victoria whispered, "You betrayed us." And then, in a voice so soft it chilled the air, Angela said, "He betrayed both of our families." But just as the crowd tried to process the lawyer's confession, Angela lifted a final page. One containing a revelation far more shocking. Not about the past, but about what she planned to do next. Angela held the final document delicately between her fingers, the sunlight catching the raised seal pressed into the paper. It wasn't a deed, not an audit, not a legal threat. It was something else entirely. Detective Coleman's breath hitched. He recognized the formatting instantly. So did Richard, whose shoulders slumped in defeat. But Victoria, still trembling, still clinging to denial, had no idea what was about to happen. "Mrs. Bradford," Angela began softly, "all afternoon you've believed I came here today to remove you, to repossess this estate, to punish you." Dozens of guests leaned closer. Victoria whispered, "Isn't that why you came?" Angela's gaze softened, not with pity, but with something far more complex. "No," she said, "I came to see how truth behaves in the presence of arrogance." The words struck like a bell, clear, unavoidable. "And what did you learn?" Victoria asked, voice cracking. "That truth waits," Angela replied. "Even when people bury it, ignore it, mock it." She turned toward the staff, the people who had known her as a child, watched her family fade from the property, and lived with guilt for decades. "Truth remembers," she continued, "and eventually it walks right back through the front gate." The guests stood silent, transfixed. Angela lowered the final page onto the table. "This," she said, "is a formal federal ruling, finalized this morning." Ray stepped closer, reading the heading. His eyes widened. "Your Honor, you didn't." Angela nodded. Victoria clutched the back of her chair. "Did what? What did you do?" Angela faced her fully. "I reinstated the Washington Estate Trust." The crowd gasped. "I declared the seizure of this property 20 years ago legally invalid." Victoria staggered backward. "No, no, please." "And," Angela continued, "effective immediately, the Washington estate is restored to its rightful status under federal oversight." The wedding erupted into whispers. Even the bride looked like she might faint. Victoria collapsed onto the nearest chair, sobbing. "So that's it! You're taking our home, you're destroying us." Angela approached slowly, her voice gentle, almost maternal. "No, Victoria, I am not here to destroy you." Michael looked up, hope flickering. "Then, what does this mean?" Angela exhaled. "It means justice has been served, and mercy is now possible." Silence rippled across the lawn. "Mercy," Victoria whispered. Angela nodded. "Yes, mercy. Your husband was misled. Your family lived in ignorance, not malice, and your son—" She glanced at Michael. "He has shown courage today." Michael bowed his head. Angela continued, "I am not here to punish you. I have already issued a recommendation to federal authorities." Ray frowned. "Recommendation?" Angela nodded. "For leniency." Gasps, disbelief, relief, confusion. Victoria sobbed harder. "Why? After everything we said to you, everything we did." Angela's voice softened. "Because I believe people can change, and because your son changed." Victoria slowly lifted her eyes. Angela stepped back. "The estate will remain in your family," she said quietly, "under conditions, under watch, but it will remain." The crowd erupted in stunned murmurs. Michael whispered, "Judge Washington, why? After everything?" Angela smiled faintly. "Because this property carries a long history. But today, it earned a new one." And as those words settled over the wedding like a blessing and a warning, Angela turned toward the crowd, ready to reveal the final condition she required before closing the case forever. A condition that would test the Bradford family's character more than any verdict ever could. The crowd stood frozen as Angela Washington looked out over the estate one final time. The tension that had once crackled with hostility now hummed with humility. Victoria Bradford wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. What are the conditions?" she whispered. "Whatever they are, I'll do them." Angela didn't answer immediately. She turned instead to the staff, people who had carried silence like a burden for 2 decades. "Thomas," she said gently. The old groundskeeper stepped forward, cap in hand, eyes shining with emotion. "You stayed," Angela said. "You protected this place when you could. You deserve recognition." Thomas swallowed hard. I only did what I could, Miss Angela. Angela nodded. Then let it finally be known. She turned to the crowd. This estate will publicly restore the Washington family name to its rightful place, Angela declared. The original crest will be reinstalled. The history will no longer be hidden. A murmur rippled through the guests. Second, she continued, a permanent scholarship fund will be created, bearing my family's name, to support students who have been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Michael stepped forward. I'll oversee it personally. Angela met his eyes. I expect nothing less. Victoria lowered her head. And me? Angela's voice remained calm but firm. You will apologize, publicly, to every staff member you disrespected today. And from this day forward, you will never again treat another human being as disposable. Victoria didn't hesitate. She nodded, tears falling freely. I will, I swear it. Angela closed her briefcase. Then we are done here. No gavel, no shouting, no arrests, just truth, finally standing where it belonged. As Angela turned to leave, the wedding guests parted instinctively, forming a silent aisle. Not out of fear, but respect. She paused once at the gates and looked back. Remember this day, she said. Power reveals who we are when we think no one is watching. Then she walked away, leaving behind a wedding that would be remembered not for its luxury, but for the lesson carved into its very foundation. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how power is used and misused, then subscribe to this channel right now. Here on Black Girl Storytime, we share powerful stories where truth rises, dignity is restored, and justice arrives when no one expects it. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay with us for stories that remind the world. Grace is the strongest form of power. Just when you think you've seen it all. In the next story, one moment of authority turns into a lifetime mistake. Because when power meets the wrong woman, everything changes. You shouldn't miss.